significance is
This conference will
portrayed
now be
through
recorded.
the indigenous and Spanish influences shaped by the city design, which is oriented towards the sun. Um, and as we continue through the trip, we traveled to Coca, and in Coca, we did our toxic oil tour with Hector. Hector brought us through palm oil plantations and showed us how oil development provides the economic benefits for Ecuador, creating many externalities and long-term environmental costs. Uh, Another example is this gas flare, which excretes excess gas that could be allocated to the local communities within the area rather than being wasted and inducing greenhouse gases and global warming. And as we continue, we also saw a local home that showed us how these indigenous communities experience the environmental burdens and hardships that they're that are inescapable um, due to their incapability of leaving their um, residence. Uh, and then as we continue, this is just a short video of the contamination of oil within one of the streams that was at a past drilling site. Um, Maybe kind of hard to see on the video, but there's lots of contamination within that stream of water. Um, and then continuing after the Tuxedo tour, we went to the Amazon. This is a video of the lodges we stayed at in the Mandari Panga, which is located on the Tipitini River. We tested the Tipitini River and the tributary next to it and found E. coli within the tributary next to it instead of the actual main channel, which shows that the community was probably um, having contamination from their residents and that was leaking into the tributary. Our local guides, this is Puma. These were the local guides who showed us how to sustainably use the rainforest plants for shelter of tools, food, and medicine while also maintaining ecosystem function. Um, and as we continue to the Amazon, we had the nature hikes during the day and at night with the local guides to observe ecosystem structure and biodiversity firsthand. We learned many survival skills, like obtaining fresh water
Oh,
from
yeah.
the tree roots, as well as seeing how biodiversity is reflected from the tree canopies to the solar horizons and the ground. Um, and as we continue through the Amazon, we also stopped at a local community where we saw how local residents emphasize the necessity of community participation in environmental education to establish their long-term conservation. And Dr. Beale's son, Tristan, he was able to create a water filtration system, which showed how simple engineering can provide clean drinking water, which improves both public health and community resilience. And after the Amazon, we traveled to Banos, did a quick stop at the Watoka coffee plantation, where we were able to see um, their processing and making their local coffee, which supports their local livelihoods and protects the mountain ecosystems as well. Then through Banos in the cloud forest, the cloud forest was one of the most unique ecosystems we visited. Uh, it captures moisture from the atmosphere and stores carbon. It supports an incredible amount of biodiversity. After that, we were able to go to a biofertilizer farm where we learned how organic waste can be recycled into fertilizer that improves soil health while reducing the dependence on synthetic fertilizers. Um, and we saw that they use a biofertilizer incubation process that uses beneficial microbes to create nutrient-rich solution that naturally improves crop productivity. Uh, we were able to visit a local um, resident who showed his variety of corn that he's been able to produce, as well as blackberries, and we had a farm to table experience where we were able to eat the local foods he grew and talk about how the sustainable methods he uses helps his community in general. We were not able to visit Cotopaxi due to a little sickness that came upon us, our group, but its summit, it's one of the world's highest active volcanoes, and the Rio Pastaza supports hydroelectric power within the region and acts as a freshwater resource, as well as it just helps the ecosystems within the Amazon basin. Uh, Continuing on the trip, we, as we were still in the cloud forest, we saw how Banyos demonstrated ecotourism, which supports local communities while encouraging conservation of the waterfalls, forests, and mountain ecosystems. Um, this is the Balion de Diablo Waterfall Park. Um, these natural attractions generate tourism revenue while incentivizing conservation for the surrounding ecosystems. And the video under it is of the waterfall, which is super cool to see in person. Definitely one of my best experiences. Uh, and as we continue on the trip, we also did a zipline adventure park, um, which was incredibly fun. Um, After that, I would like to just go quickly through the Caribbean connections and the fact that although Ecuador is on the Pacific coast, many of its sustainability challenges mirror those of the Caribbean and the southeastern United States. Um, some of those factors include climate change, flooding, biodiversity conservation, as well as freshwater management. And as we continue on the trip, I have my highlighted moments or my favorite moments of the trip, which were mostly in the indigenous community where we had fresh tilapia prepared for us. We played soccer with the local residents and the kids in the community in the pouring rain. And lastly, the Banos Cataract, where I was able to be directly under the waterfall and see how during the crazy, the waterfall it was a high flow. So it was even more incredible than um, experiencing at a different time of year. And I think that that's everything. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniel. While I load up the next presentation, I realized that we were excuse me, I realized that we kind of hit the recording button a little late, so I'll give a little context. We're here today hearing more about our myself and Dr. Veal. We were able to co-teach a 2-week course, a study abroad course with the College of Charleston to learn more about water quality and environmental sustainability and the cultural impacts that occur in Ecuador on environmental sustainability. So we're hearing from students today on their perspectives. And Daniel just wrapped his up. Thank you so much, Daniel. Next up, let's see, I will pull up, I think Cami has to hop off for work. So Courtney, if you want to turn on your screen, I will start sharing your presentation. And you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and I will turn off my mic in just 1 second. All right. All right, go ahead, Courtney.
Perfect. Hi guys, my name's Courtney. I just finished my second year at the College of Charleston. I'm a double major in political science and environmental sustainability studies, and I concentrate in politics, philosophy, and law. My presentation definitely focuses more on the cultural aspects of things, just because that's what I have more experience in with college so far. But overall, I had a great experience. It taught me a lot about environmental stewardship overall, and I recommend going to Ecuador any chance you can. You're welcome to go down. Perfect. So why I wanted to go to Ecuador, I'm trying to get into conservation law, land use law, or some sort of legal accountability work. So I chose Ecuador because it's internationally recognized for its biodiversity, indigenous cultures, and innovative conservation efforts. I really wanted to see sustainability beyond the classroom, but also how communities respond to environmental challenges and to experience firsthand how environmental policy reflects on landscapes. To see ground-up conservation and learn directly from local experts was also a huge pull for me. I thought this was a great trip that reflected all of those. And while I did expect to learn about environmental science, I feel like I learned a lot more about people in the long term. Thank you, Dr. Veal. So yeah, keto, that was a lot of our beginning trip. So sustainability beyond nature, and it demonstrated a lot how preserving cultural heritage alongside environmental resources is really important. We saw a lot of the historic neighborhoods that reflected how communities protect places that define their identity, but they still adapt to modern urban development. This also brought up a huge concern, however, because urban sustainability requires balancing population growth, transportation, economic development, and environmental responsibility. And a lot of us got to see firsthand how that sort of challenge develops and how it kind of creates a bigger problem for the people there, especially if the government's kind of trying to ignore it for a little bit. But sustainability definitely begins by recognizing that healthy communities and healthy environments depend upon one another. Perfect. Then we went to the toxic oil tour. This was definitely one of my most impactful proportions of the trip, even though I did not think in the moment with how hot it was and with our huge rubber boots on. I was actually very surprised how much I enjoyed this. We focused on oil extraction, and it really highlighted how difficult the balance between economic development and environmental protection is. The water contamination we saw demonstrated how environmental degradation directly impacts public health and the indigenous communities nearby it. Seeing the political accountability emphasize the importance of responsible and informed decision making, we got to learn from our guide Hector, who had, I believe, 6 months prior gotten his environmental law degree, which, as someone who that is what I'm trying to aim for, I thought was really cool, especially to hear from him firsthand how he was trying to help his community. It definitely, this experience highlighted how when governments fail to protect communities, it's really the local people that often become their own environmental advocates. And it was a really big inspiration for me personally. Perfect. You can go ahead and do the next slide. Then we got to the Amazon, which I absolutely loved. This was really fun. This was especially evident during our visit to Mandari Panga, the idea of conservation in action. We saw a water filtration system or a water filtration project led by Professor Veal's son, the Clemson alum Tristan Veal, to provide safe drinking water for the local school. What impressed me most was not just the technology itself, but community's commitment to it. Local volunteers dedicated countless hours to preparing this site, but the community's commitment to, oh, sorry, my thing's going off. Local volunteers definitely dedicated countless hours to preparing the site, assisting with construction, learning how to maintain the systems themselves. Their involvement ensures that this project will remain sustainable long after outside partners leave. That same commitment was reflected through the community. We met Abuelita, the founder of Mandari Panga, and her daughter, who serves as a steward for local turtle conservation efforts. Her daughter rehabilitates turtles beneath her home, fostering them until they're strong enough to contribute to the recovery of local turtle populations. Her work is driven not by a large conservation program, but by a personal commitment to protecting an ecosystem that is central to the community's identity. We encountered a really similar philosophy during our visit to the Watoka community on the next slide. Perfect. There, we followed the full life cycle of coffee from cultivation and harvesting to processing and distribution. What fascinated me was seeing how coffee production was connected to something much larger than agriculture. Through a community-oriented approach, coffee helps support education, economic opportunity, and local well-being. That connection was especially clear at the, I will mispronounce it, but it's Uarnia Pacha community.
Webinars de la NOAA, pero como ellos lo mandan después, pero solo si uno se conecta. Pero te quería decir, yo no sé si tú leíste.
Sorry, if everyone could stay muted. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that, Courtney.
No, you're so okay. I thought that was coming from my computer and I had no idea how. But yeah, how it supports education, economic opportunity, and local well-being. It was really clear at the Pacha Community Library, where investments in learning and cultural preservation are viewed as an essential part of building a sustainable future. That's the little building in the center picture right there at the bottom. And overall, my visits to Mandari Pange and Watoka highlighted the power of grassroots action in general, whether through building the water filtration system or educating future generations. They demonstrated that conservation is most successful when it's driven by the people who are closest to its challenges and most invested in the solutions. It was really inspiring to see like how meaningful environmental stewardship often starts from the ground up, and just how healthy ecosystems and healthy communities support one another. And then the cloud forest. This was when we were all getting sick, so I actually have weirdly dear memories to this part. I definitely feel like we all bonded in a way. Might not have been the prettiest though, but this was really cool because we got to see how ecotourism provides sustainable economic opportunities that encourage local communities to protect forests rather than convert them to other land uses. Even conservation activities have environmental costs, making life cycle thinking and efficient resource management essential for reducing the carbon footprint of research and ecotourism. But conservation becomes stronger when local people benefit from protecting their environment, which is why it was really cool to stay at the Mandari Panga Lounge that is an ecotourist area, and also just get to zip line in Ecuador, which was really fun, and see a lot of their cultural sites. I thought it was really fun, especially when we got to go to the equator. And as sick as I was that day, I feel like I really experienced the altitude. So I think it was a really fun experience in general. On the next slide, just overall, what Ecuador taught me about sustainability is that, again, it's most successful when conservation efforts are designed, implemented, and maintained by the local communities, that it requires a balance between ecological health, economic opportunity, education, and cultural preservation. Every experience from Quito to the Amazon demonstrated conservation depends on collaboration rather than isolated solutions. And overall, ground up conservation creates lasting change because local people remain invested long after outside organizations leave. The best conservation isn't done for communities, it's done with them. And I think that was a huge point that I got from this trip, especially working with Dr. Veal's son, Tristan, and seeing how he developed his project. On the next slide, the way applying this beyond Ecuador, specifically to the Caribbean, like Daniel said, they share a lot of similar sustainability challenges involving biodiversity, conservation, tourism, freshwater resources, and climate resilience. Ecuador demonstrates that successful conservation depends upon empowering communities rather than relying exclusively on external organizations, and that it succeeds when local voices lead. Investments in education, environmental stewardship, and local leadership strengthen resilience across diverse ecosystems, and ground-up conservation provides a model that can inform sustainable development across the world, including the Caribbean. And overall, that protecting ecosystems starts with empowering the people who depend on them first. When getting into my favorite memory, I have two competing ones. I couldn't really figure it out. I'm also probably going to bring the third in because I did love the waterfall that Daniel brought up, and I honestly forgot about that when making this presentation. But on the left, this was a 200-year-old fig tree in the middle of an arts building, and I am not an art connoisseur at all. I was really trying to focus, and it was really cool, but it's just not something that speaks to me usually. And so when our guide briefly mentioned, he was like, "Oh, that room's got like a tree or something in it," and then like moved on immediately. As soon as we got a chance to go somewhere, I found that room immediately. It was so cool. This is on the second floor of an art gallery in the middle of a city, and it was just really peaceful, and I actually love this room, and it's something that I took away with me. And then also just this is a picture of our candlelit dinners in the Amazon jungle every night, and I thought that was really fun, especially it forced everyone to unplug, and you don't really get to have family dinners anymore, so especially in college. So I thought this was a really cool experience with honestly strangers before this trip, and I feel like I really bonded with people because of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's the last slide I have, but round of applause. I really appreciate the students. Courtney mentioned it, but a lot of us did get very sick, which impacted the last 2 days of our trip. So I'm really proud of everyone for powering through and still being engaged and wanting to learn despite not feeling great at all. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. Next up, we have Emmy. If you want to go ahead and hop on camera. Let's see, full screen. All right, I will pass the mic to Emmy.
Hello. So this is my experience. My name is Emiliana Baldwin. This is my experience with sustainability in Ecuador. Go next. Next slide. A little bit about me. I am a junior at the College of Charleston, and I am double majoring in environmental and sustainability studies and environmental geoscience. I wanted to go to Ecuador specifically because I really wanted to gain more field experience when it comes to learning about water quality and like getting data in the field in like such remote locations like the Amazon. And I also thought it would be a really interesting experience learning from people who are in sustainability, who have different experiences and ideas about what sustainability might look like. For the future, I would specifically like to go into environmental research as in environmental science. I'm really interested in hydrology at the moment and how climate change and urbanization and other human impacts are affecting water systems and how people have access and ecosystems have access to water. So our first stop, of course, is Quito. I really focused on a couple different things in Quito. I was really interested in the story about their water access. Quito, we found, gets most of their water from the Highlands Mountains, away from the city, and it's taken by pipes into the city. But those systems are not very reliable, leading to a lot of people having, I don't know if you can see in the picture, but a lot of people who are living in Quito have rain barrels on their roofs so that they have access to clean water when the pipes are out of service. And the access to this water is kind of a human-made problem in that due to the rapid urbanization of Quito and the surrounding area is causing a lot of shortages to happen with not a lot of people being able to have, there's too many people and not enough water basically for the current system that is in place. And there's also a lot of landslides that are happening due to climate change and loss of vegetation that are affecting the pipe systems. I was also interested in how everyday consumption was different in Quito versus like in the US where I'm from. In Quito, a lot of places where we ate, there was almost always like reusable tableware was used, which is not really what you see in America. I thought this was kind of like a cultural difference in that eating out is much more for special occasions and is much more costly than in America. I feel like buying groceries every week is a lot more costly than eating out multiple times a week. And I also thought it was interesting the trade-off with how using reusable tableware is more expensive than paper or plastic, but also you don't have to keep buying more tableware, but with paper and plastic, you don't have to wash it and you don't have to put the strain on the already short water system that they have in Quito. Moving on to, we went to the rainforest after Quito. We went to specifically around the city of Limoncoca. These are some pictures of the toxic oil tour that other people had mentioned before. I really focused on how the drilling for the oil has affected environmental services, specifically pollinators were really heavily affected by the drilling, and how the fumes that were mentioned by Courtney earlier are provide a light source 24/7, causing a lot of these insects and other pollinators to get confused and then die because they fly into the fumes. And this is a really big detriment to the biodiversity of the surrounding area and the production of food. Also the toxic oil that infiltrates the ground also can poison a lot of plants and stunt the growth of them, leading to less food being available for these pollinators. So these pollinators are very affected by these oil drilling. There's also the issue in the rainforest that a bunch of uncontained pits were created when the oil companies left in the, I think, 90s it was. But these oil pits were just covered with dirt and not really cleaned up at all, causing the oil to seep into the groundwater, poisoning a lot of local rivers and streams, which is really detrimental to the ecosystem and the local populations that are living in this area. Because of this groundwater infiltration, it's poisoning not only rivers, but a lot of the food sources people are relying on, since it heavily stunts plant growth. And also the oil is a carcinogen, which is really very dangerous for the people that are using the water and eating the food in the area. There's also the issue, sorry, I had a lot to talk about on the other one. There's also the issue that the oil pits are a big detriment to the water systems in the area. There's a lot of erosion happening because the water systems have been disrupted, and this causes even more sediment to be taken into the rivers and oil to be exposed to the surface. Yes, so after Lemoncocco, we went directly to Mindaripanga, which was in Yasuni National Park. In Yasuni National Park, they also have oil drilling, which is really interesting because the government was technically supposed to shut down all of the oil drilling in Yasuni National Park because it is a wildlife refuge. In 2023, they were ruled to do so, but they haven't yet. So that was a really interesting thing we learned about. Ecuador, we learned, has a very large economic reliance on oil exports. So that's probably the reason why the government and companies don't want to shut down the drilling, even though it causes a lot of environmental harm. And also, there is the issue that the drilling does provide somewhat financial stability to the local people, even though it is very, very detrimental to their water sources and their food sources and their health. So that's not a great contrast. On a better note, there is other sustainable programs are the Sherpa Turtle Project, which we learned about from one of the local community members, it's a women-run program that their aim is to improve the turtle population in the Amazon, since they are seen as kind of like a delicacy to eat in Ecuador. And so a lot of poachers will come and take the eggs to then sell to people in the city so that they can eat them. And that's put a lot of strain on the turtle populations. And so this project is trying to increase the number of turtles and kind of protect the eggs so they're able to grow and increase the population. And this is also an interesting program because it is the person we met, her branch was completely women-run, providing more opportunities, financial opportunities to women in the community, which was really interesting. And moving out of the Amazon, we went to Baños, where we learned about sustainable agriculture with the Vizcaya Agroecological Farm. They cultivate microorganisms to ferment plant biomass that creates a natural fertilizer. This natural fertilizer, oh God, I had something written down. well, sorry, this natural fertilizer is good for increasing the amount of nutrients, long-lasting nutrients in the soil for these crops, and creates a lot of long-lasting food so that there's less is needed to fertilize the crops, as well as not as much toxic runoff being created when these crops are fertilized, creating an overall more sustainable agricultural practice in the area. There's not a monetary incentive for these farmers to farm more sustainably, which I thought was interesting. It's more the motivation that they will have a more sustainable farming practice and and product. But although that is great for the local economy and people, there are still the drawbacks of or the pushbacks of if people will see the impact of sustainable farming. Sorry. If they're able to keep using the sustainable farming, even though there's a lot of competition who might not be using sustainable farming, who will have a larger yield in a short period of time, and who are able or who are in direct competition with the sustainable farmers. And it's often much cheaper. Then still in around Banos, we went to just outside the cloud, in the cloud forest, we went to the Punzan Canopy, which was the zip lining trip we did, which was really, really fun. I thought it was really interesting, the ecotourism angle of this ziplining park, with how little impact the ziplining itself had on the local ecosystem, but while still providing financial stability to the locals who lived in the area, and also was just really beautiful to see from a tourism perspective. I did find like a slight drawback in this ecotourism, in that the transportation was almost exclusively cars and buses and motorcycles, which have their own environmental drawbacks with the carbon emissions and the resources that are used in other parts of the world that are mined and then used to create the cars, and then the oil used to fuel the cars that we saw in the rainforest. The drilling was really detrimental to the environment. So I was thinking about a way to kind of get around that issue, to make this tourism spot even more environmentally friendly and sustainable, would be to have the infrastructure to expand the buses to this business, so that there's like a routine bus route that the workers can take and that tour groups can take, lowering the amount of emissions and just overall better for the forest. Some overall lessons I learned while in Ecuador was the importance of community action. There are no physical boundaries when it comes to environmental issues, and progress can only really be made when there is organization and communication within these programs. You can't ever one person can never do a lot of, one person by themselves can't fix environmental issues. This has to be an entire community working together to make a difference and to make change in their own communities. And I thought that was really interesting to learn about people's ability to organize and work on projects that they thought was important to them. I also observed how much government involvement also is really important when it comes to sustainability, and how a lot of government regulation is really needed to back up these sustainable projects, such as regulating the oil drilling in the rainforest and the the poaching of the turtle eggs, and making sure that these sustainable practices are upheld by the community, and even providing aid, financial aid, to people who are doing the drilling and the poaching, because they don't want to harm their community. They really are just trying to make a living and to survive, and that's really important. How I connected in Ecuador's sustainability to the Caribbean and global sustainability is how, when we were in Quito, we went to a museum, an art museum, and the tour guide we met was pointed out how in Ecuador and Quito especially, there is a large disconnect with the people there and their environment. Like, she would be talking to us about and beliefs that the people used to have about the environment, specifically like about possums. Possums were really culturally revered for being like representing fertility and family and that kind of thing. And that's kind of been forgotten by the local public. And I thought it was really interesting how there's been this huge disconnect with people as they become more urbanized and detached from their environment, how much less they care about the environment, and how that can sort of lead to all of these environmental issues to be built upon or able to happen, is people don't really feel a connection with their environment anymore, and don't feel like they can have a say in what happens in their local communities. And I thought that was a really big issue that is withstanding, I think, globally, is kind of an issue, is people are kind of ambivalent to environmental issues. And so I thought it would be, going forward, it's probably a good idea to try and remember the local history and practices when it comes to trying to live more sustainably, looking into how local people used to live, and how they were sort of able to maintain their communities for hundreds of years, and how that can be implemented into modern science, I thought was really interesting. Yeah. And then finally, my favorite memory was definitely going to the local community and near Mandaripanga and seeing the school children, since Dr. Veal had gone there previously, and he and his son had helped communicate with the community to help with like building bathrooms and figuring out this trip was figuring out getting them able to have clean drinking water. And I thought that was a really, really great demonstration of how environmental engineering can help people. And I thought it was just it was really interesting how the clean water system was implemented in a way that was simple enough that it can be replicated and taught to other people in the community, so they can also have clean drinking water and spread that kind of information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emmy. Really appreciate it. And I will say the blackberries that we had at the agricultural farm were very delicious after learning more about the biofertilization. So next up, we have Henry, and I will pass the mic to Henry after I get his presentation. There we go.
Hello, I'm Henry Roop. I'm a rising junior at the College of Charleston. I'm studying environmental and sustainability studies along with religious studies. I'm excited to talk about my experience, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. So I wanted to go to Ecuador because I'd never done a study abroad before, and I knew that a study abroad would give a more immersive travel experience, and you'd be able to experience a place for all that it is, take in culture, interact with the people in a way that normal travel you just kind of don't do. And I also knew that studying in my classes the dangers of our global systems and capitalism, not just in my environmental and sustainability class, but also my religious studies class through the works of Karl Marx, Max Weber. I really wanted to see how our global systems shift burdens onto the marginalized in person. And then also it just sounded like a really fun adventure. And yeah, originally I got into environmental work because I have a passion for the outdoors that grew into a stewardship ethic. And I felt like I wanted to work in conservation. I still am very much open to that. But in some ways, I just feel like conservation can be kind of participating in an unfair system, especially in just the US. Um, uh, and going to Ecuador really broadened that for me because I just saw bigger issues. And, you know, conservation can push industry uh, away from or towards places that have less resources to resist industry and um, places like, or industries like oil and stuff. So I'm not sure about my niche and what I want to do, but I know that I'd like to pursue real change and work to build a society that values human and environmental health. And I think that would be the best thing for conservation anyway. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our first stop in Ecuador was the capital, Quito. Immediately I noticed a very heavy colonial influence through the basilica, societal organization, architecture, but at the same time, I also saw Incan and local culture. And I think there was a healthy persistence of both. We went to a museum that exhibited a lot of Incan culture. And our guide mentioned how the Spanish originally pushed the Incans to the hills, which was really interesting. And it also made me reflect about how tourism can be a sustainable and unsustainable mechanism. We were in the Old Town for most of our time in Quito, and it can be sustainable in that it funds preservation of historic sites like the Old Town. It can provide economic benefit, local employment, but I think that it can be unsustainable when it prioritizes profit over like cultural absorption, and also it pushes locals out of like spaces that they've occupied for a long time. So from there we flew to Coca, and this really elucidates what I was talking about earlier, how burdens are shifted onto the most marginalized. I saw palm plantations, I saw palm oil dump sites, we saw all kinds of crude oil infrastructure, crude oil dump sites. We even saw a family living on top of a crude oil dump sites. And again, I mean, these do provide employment for the local communities, but they disproportionately see the amount of wealth that these industries generate, and they see most of the burdens. And that's really what I came to Ecuador to see and explore. Next slide, please. Then we went to the Amazon rainforest in Mandaripanga. So in sustainability, indigenous culture is a really big talking point. And I never really fully understood why until I came here. And that's because, not only because indigenous cultures and peoples have lived sustainably with their environment for ages, but you know, when we were in Ecuador and in the Amazon rainforest, our guides would stop us as we were walking through the forest and tell us all these unique relationships they had with different plant species, different animals, and it was just a very synergistic relationship with the environment. And I think that replicating those like indigenous culture and modernity might be like impractical to mirror it, but I think there's real value and lessons we can learn from studying it and experiencing it. I also saw incredibly incredible biodiversity. The amount of plant species, animal species was staggering. And then we also were fortunate enough to go to a local village and learn about water quality infrastructure with Dr. Vale's son and experience the local culture there. From there, we went to Rio Verde, where we went to Ecominga. We learned about their soil building work, their fertilizer work, where they used fermentation to build sustainable fertilizer practices. And we were able to go inside a local family's home that used the fertilizer to grow all of these foods. And it was a great cultural experience. From there, one of the biggest things I took away from the cloud forest was I think ecotourism can be a really positive thing because it gives tourists a really fun and mostly unintrusive way to enjoy nature and build like natural or value for nature. And it also provides local employment for the locals. So I felt like it was a really, again, kind of synergistic relationship there. So my biggest takeaways and one of the most impactful things was the poverty I saw. And I saw poverty in just a way that I never have here in the United States. And the people were still happy. The sense of community was there. And that was really impactful for me. Also, just seeing Ecuador everywhere we went, living with consequences of industry in a way we don't in the United States, reaping none of the benefits that their industry, that their people are sacrificing for. That was a big takeaway. And then again, just experiencing the biodiversity and watching the locals live alongside of it was a big takeaway for me. Connecting this to Caribbean sustainability, I've been fortunate to travel to the Caribbean. And what I've noticed is it's kind of like when you go to these resorts, it's like living inside of a sphere for a week and like an isolated sphere. And a lot of that wealth doesn't make it to the local community. And when you drive through the local side of town is on the opposite side of the tourist side. And I just see that as an issue of justice and values. And I think it's a global pattern, not just in Ecuador and the Caribbean, but in a lot of marginalized communities all over the world. And then my favorite memory was the soccer game we played with the local kids. Dr. Veal told us that it gave the kids such a sense of pride for us to come and play with them, and seeing the joy on their face was just so impactful for me, and it made the whole trip worth it. So thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I will say during that soccer game, it poured rain and we were all just soaked, but the kids still beat us embarrassingly. It was elementary school kids and we lost really bad. All right. Next up, we have Isabel. So while I put your presentation in full screen, if you want to hop on camera, and I will pass the mic to you.
Gotcha. Hi, my name is Isabel. I am going into my second year at College of Charleston, and I am a double major in environmental and sustainability studies and environmental geosciences with a minor in theater. One of the main reasons I chose this trip was to explore my potential career. I have a lot of different varied interests in the sustainability and environmental fields, and I wanted to see which of those would have a more clear preference in a real world setting as opposed to in a classroom. And I feel like Ecuador was the perfect location for this because of its incredible and complex sustainability challenges. So that during this trip, I was able to learn about a wide variety of issues and ways to address them. So our first few days were spent in Quito with our guide Andreas. This part of the trip was really important because it introduced us to Ecuadorian culture and helped us understand how sustainability is approached in urban areas, like waste management and the water quality system and the introduction of green spaces throughout the city. And then the next part of our trip was probably the most impactful to me. This was the toxic oil tour. So we went with our guide Hector, and he shared a lot of stories about the environmental and social impacts of oil extraction and contamination. We even got to visit the house of a friend of his, and their house was actually built on top of a filled oil pit. They did not know at the time they purchased the property, and by the time they figured it out, nobody was willing to buy the land from them, so they cannot move, and they're essentially stuck in this contaminated environment. And I feel like that situation really shows the main environmental justice concerns around the oil industry in Ecuador, and it also reinforces the idea that sustainability should not just be about protecting ecosystems, but it should also be about protecting people and ensuring fair treatment of communities. And then our time in Yasuni National Park at Mandaripanga provided a much more biodiverse-centered focus. We learned a lot about ecosystem services, but we also learned about the cultural importance of nature, where these different plants serve medicinal, spiritual, or ceremonial purposes for indigenous communities. And that really emphasized that conservation should also be about protecting cultural knowledge and traditional relationships with the environment, in addition to protecting species and biodiversity. Next on our trip, we learned about sustainable agriculture. So we visited Ecominga, which is an organization that creates its own fertilizer and then also raises money to purchase land for conservation. And then we toured Wetoka, which is a coffee company, and that they don't use monoculture farming, which is a big selling point of theirs. But what stood out to me most about them is that they use a large part of their profits to build and then support the Yayurina Pasha Community Library, which provides educational opportunities for local children. Free books, all that type of stuff, so they can support the community. And these two examples of organizations really prove that we can actually address environmental, economic, and social goals simultaneously when we have businesses that prioritize community well-being above or alongside profit. And we fleshed out this idea a little more when we went to the cloud forest, where we observed the significant role that ecotourism plays in local economies. And while it can cause issues such as overburdening places and issues with transportation causing more pollution, it also was very impressive with how many local businesses used their tourism revenue to give back into the community through the form of conservation efforts, which builds on the point from the last slide about sustainable agriculture, that economic incentives can in fact be aligned with environmental protection, and that especially when local communities benefit directly from preserving biodiversity, we see conservation becoming a lot more common, even at the expense of community profit. And then throughout the trip, we learned a lot of sustainability lessons, but these are a few that stuck out the most to me. So education needs to be our first step. People are a lot more likely to support sustainable practices when they truly and deeply understand the environmental challenges and potential solutions. And then we need to address underlying issues instead of just symptoms. Lasting problems require lasting solutions, and lasting solutions mean we need to deeply understand the problems so that we don't create unfair and unjust burden shifting when we attempt to solve things. Which means that every ecological decision must have a trade-off. There is never going to be a perfect solution, so we need to make sure we carefully weigh costs and benefits so that we're not harming communities in our attempts to help the environment. Next, traditional knowledge is key. It's incredibly valuable as Indigenous communities often possess generations of environmental knowledge that can contribute to sustainable management, which leads into the last and most important lesson that I learned, which is to listen to communities, and that effective sustainability efforts must be built with communities and not imposed upon them. A lot of the issues we learned about in Ecuador are global and widespread, but there is specifically a lot of overlap with the Caribbean, specifically because of the amount of multicultural influence and religious impact, but also because the high biodiversity levels means both places deal with issues such as ecotourism and conservation. And then the lessons that I learned throughout my trip in Ecuador helped me understand that even though these sustainability challenges can be global, our solutions to them need to be local and culturally specific, because we cannot just attempt to take one policy that works somewhere else and move it to a different place, to a different place, to a different place, because there are layered impacts and layered considerations that need to go into creating true sustainable solutions. So even though we might have similar and widespread problems in similar locations, that does not mean we can just take something that works somewhere else and input it without looking deeply into what community well-being could be affected by. And then last slide. So my favorite memory was like quite a few other people. I really, really enjoyed the waterfall. It was really fun. It was also kind of a smaller group because a lot of people stayed back because we were struck with the plague. But overall, this trip really expanded my understanding of sustainability far beyond what I think I could ever get in a classroom. And it helped me understand the complexities of environmental issues and the importance of integrating social, cultural, and economic considerations and not just seeing things from an ecological perspective. And most importantly, it made me really excited for my future career in environmental science. And it reinforced the idea that for meaningful environmental solutions, we have to have collaboration, education, and respect for people as well as nature. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Isabel. And I agree, even though we were struck by the plague, this waterfall was incredible. Next up, we have two more presentations. Next up, we have James, who I know your camera was being a little weird earlier. Are you able to hop on camera, or will you just be audio today? Oh, it looks like he might have dropped off, actually. Okay, well, while he figures that out, we will go to Chloe, who was our only graduate student on this trip. Everyone else was an undergraduate student. So we will end today's presentations with our only grad students. So go ahead, Chloe, I'll pass it to you.
All right, hi, I'm going last. So this is my presentation on the cultural and environmental sustainability in Ecuador. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little about myself. Again, I'm Chloe, and as Dr. Alyssa said, I'm the only grad student this time around that went on this trip. I just completed my first semester, so everything is so new to me at the moment. And I'm pursuing a master's in environmental and sustainability studies alongside a master of public administration. And one of the big reasons I wanted to go on this trip, I wanted to kick off the grad program with like a boom, like traveling a little bit first. My ultimate goal for the future, I actually landed on this idea right after the Ecuador trip. I started figuring it all out, is to be a restoration ecologist and work on a lot of water and plant-based projects here in hopefully Charleston or somewhere in the southeast of the United States. So a big thing about this trip was helping to like hone in on water quality testing skills and using probes I've never used before. And other than that, I just wanted to experience just something different. I've never been to South America before, and I wanted to get a different or like unique perspective on sustainability and environmental policies that I wasn't aware of or that work in a different country that don't work here and vice versa. So these are kind of the big reasons why I wanted to do this Ecuador trip. Next slide. So Quito is our first stop. One thing that really stuck out to me in terms of environmental policy and something that the government is actually trying to do is a green and blue project, or a push to plant more native plants. A lot of the flora we witnessed were from elsewhere, were invasive or non-native. So there's this new kind of push that I think is actually spreading in a lot of areas to go more native. This will also help foster a better sense of cultural and social identity. A lot of Ecuadorians seem to take pride in things that are theirs, such as the orchid flower. And as you can see in that middle picture on my presentation, it's a whole stained glass display of different kinds of orchids found in Ecuador. The biggest problem, though, even though the government is pushing for this project, will it actually go through? And if not, who else might fund or carry? And kind of on a same note in terms of people and human sustainability, another thing I learned in Quito is about the indigenous and their rights and recognition. They're also a big source of Ecuador's cultural pride, at least on a surface level. But after learning more and more, there still seems to be a lack of distributional and procedural power for the indigenous. In other words, access to the same resources that other Ecuadorians have, access to the same justice system that other Ecuadorians have. You can go to the next slide. There, toxic oil tour. Yes. So similarly, the indigenous in the Amazon are experiencing some of the worst of the worst. And this was kind of very eye-opening. I've never seen something like this in person before. All the leftovers and improper disposal left behind from like Texaco and Petroecuador's oil mining. We saw a bunch of different things like abandoned pumps, as other people have said, residentials built on top of undisclosed oil pits, oil sheen and crude in the water, and then gas flare, what I like to call like insect graveyards, just a mass killing of all the insects. And when we were water quality testing around here, we did find mercury, copper, and zinc in the water, which was of concern. And another big environmental disaster there was the domination of palm plantations, all the deforestation and fragmentation of land, as well as invasive planting such as kudzu, which is also a problem here in South Carolina. Ultimately, again, it showcases the lack of justice for the indigenous and Amazonians, as well as the lack of education about these cancer-causing chemicals and water pollution. And despite the fact that it's being brought more to light, nothing is really still being concretely done about it. Next, on a more positive note, we went into the Amazon for about 5 days and became more ingrained with the environment and the Quechua, the indigenous that lived there. What I found interesting is kind of the difference between the Western version of sustainability and like all these concrete separate pillars, whereas the indigenous kind of integrate them all into one just like circle called Buen Vivir, or the rights of nature. So kind of everything just goes through the circle, like the same use of resources boosts their culture, the environment, they give back to the environment and their economy. However, it is interesting to note that at least in terms of economic sustainability, they are moving towards other things like external ways to get revenue to protect Yasuni National Park from all the environmental harm and climate change that's coming around. And some examples of climate change include like atypical wet and dry seasons that we've all noticed, declining turtle populations, this red glow in the sky from faraway gas flares. That was pretty crazy to see. And E. coli detected in the Tipitini and the Napo River. So some of the ways that they are trying to boost their economy to protect the environment is moving towards ecotourism and like selling handicrafts that they made, which some of us bought. So it kind of helped get us involved with boosting their protection efforts. Speaking of ecotourism, we made several pit stops to Watoka Coffee Plantation and the Ikominga Blackberry Farm. This was a nice, unique, and like intimate look at the sustainable agricultural practice we got to partake in, or look around and tour. As other people have talked about, the use of biofertilizer, no pesticides, and then Watoka's composting and natural fertilization for their coffee and lemonade production. This was very interesting to see, and us just like being able to see this and kind of even like we got to like buy some of their products or just partake in the process, just this connection between tourists or students from a different country and these agricultural farmers kind of will like help boost them in a way to where these sustainable practices can like get better recognition or grow and hopefully spread to other parts of the country, to move Ecuador towards a more sustainable agricultural kind of area. Next. And then finally, we continued to tour around the Rio Verde and Baños. As I mentioned, this kind of part of the tour involved a lot of community engagement with partaking in the biofertilizer making process and getting all these educational experiences. And one word that really stuck out to me was the word minga, or like small groups gathering to build or maintain infrastructure and projects for the public well-being. And I found that very interesting. And then on a different note, we got to experience the differences between a cloud forest and the Amazon rainforest. The cloud forest here in Rio Verde was it was very foggy. It was right where like the forest meets the mountains, a bit of a cooler temperature. So it was interesting to see how way of life kind of adapted to that kind of climate instead. Lots of livestock raising and terrace farming and landslide mitigation. Landslides were a huge problem in this area, and we got to see some of the effects of that, so that was very interesting as well. Next slide. And overall lessons. It seems that a lot of these environmental and sustainability efforts are coming from within, and especially from the indigenous populations. Government backing is very iffy at the moment. Other than that, I talked about the Green and Blue project, but who knows if that will really take flight unless people from the ground get involved with this. So I think education, community, and ecotourism will hopefully lead to steady policy change in this realm. However, there is still a lack of justice for what these big industries and corruption has caused to these communities. And then comparing it with the Caribbean, from my understanding, a lot of lower income nations tend to get hit the most with climate change issues, because of one, their geographic circumstance, and as well as limited finances, resources, infrastructure, and education for sustainability practices. And as other people have mentioned, a lot of people in these cultures rely on fishing, agriculture, forestry, and the oil mining for their household income. So making these changes would be very difficult, as it interferes with workers' daily life. And then finally, my favorite memory was probably the food, and I think cuisine is an important part to any kind of cultural exchange. I think I destroyed every meal that was offered to me up until the Great Sickness. But I think the chocolate making process with the quichua was the one that stuck out to me the most, because not only was it delicious, but we got to closely work with the quichua in a very different kind of cultural way, and I had a lot of fun understanding this process and had fun with the result. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chloe. Recognizing time, if folks do have to hop off, this is being recorded, so you can always take a look at it later. It looks like we might have James, our last student, to present on the line. I don't know if James, you can hear us or if you're still having tech issues. I'm not sure. But since we're coming up on time, if folks do have questions or want to follow up, I will put my email in the chat. And I can connect with Dr. Veal if there are any specific questions that he can help answer. But just want to be respectful of everybody's time. It does look like we can't hear James, unfortunately, but he, I'll go through his pictures real quick since he put it together. Wanted to get more hands-on experience, I think, like a lot of our students wanted. So I think, oh, I can see him. Can't hear you, James. Okay, 1 second. If folks can stay on and want to listen, feel free. Like I said, this will be recorded and will be on our NOAA in the Caribbean YouTube channel, so we can share it out once we wrap up today and it's uploaded.
Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can hear you. Perfect. And I will say, if any students have to drop off, also feel free to drop off. James, I'll go ahead and pass the mic to you. We have a couple minutes if folks want to stay on the line. So
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I'll just say you guys had some really fancy presentations. Mine's a little more plain, but yeah, here's some lessons that I learned from Ecuador. I'm a junior at the College of Charleston, majoring in environmental and sustainability studies. I'd say my focus is sort of on like I want to work with animals, and as you can see, I've been volunteering at the Center for Birds of Prey since 2022, and we do work with like raptor birds, like big, birds of prey. So yeah, I'm interested in animals, and yeah, I've already visited Ecuador once. So that was back in 2022, and I went to a completely different part of the country. I went to the Andes Mountains, and this was also as sort of like a sustainability trip. It wasn't with a school or anything, but we mainly learned about working with local communities there in the Andes, and then yeah, learning about sustainability practices in other parts of the country. I apologize, my memory is kind of foggy right now, but yeah, it was very different from what we did here. But next slide, we good. So we started by going to Quito, which again I'd been to before, but we learned about the pollution issues there, and then you could sort of visibly see like there were problems with pollution on the streets. It's not the cleanest place. It's not dirty by any means, but it's not the cleanest place. Um, there's a lot of poverty there, so people may want be sort of like just discarding things, and there's lots of cars there, so it's very crowded. It's a big city. So and then we also got a sort of history lesson in corruption from the officials there and misallocating funds. Um, we were told that there is enough to go around, like energy wise, but the way that they allocate it there is not very efficient. So there are, power outages there. Not everyone has enough energy to like wash their clothes properly. They have to do like hang it out to dry. But there is a lot of use of renewable energy. I believe it was hydropower was the main. Yeah, hydropower is the main source of renewable energy there, which accounts for a majority of the power that is used there. Um, I don't want to say an exact number because I can't remember it now, but yeah, it's a large percentage. In the next slide. And then we went to the toxic tour, where I learned for the first time about the palm oil industry, which I did not have prior knowledge of. And unfortunately, I didn't include a picture here, but it creates a lot of waste, and it's just something you wouldn't expect. It's literally just plants, like it's just palm trees, but they leave them in these massive dumps, and the local community has to deal with that, and the oil from these palms, the pits, will leak into the local water, like the groundwater, and it will leave toxins in there, and it's just as bad as like normal oil, which we also saw there. As you can see by the picture of the glove, that was in someone's, like right in someone's backyard. We visited someone's house, and literally, like, I want to say like 20, 25 feet away, we just go down the hill and we can see from not very far away, there's this oil spill, and the oil is getting into the mud and in the water, and you can just put your hand in it and it's completely like black with like oil. And then you can see there one of these oil pumps. I think it was said there were almost 500 of these across the nation, and they run 24/7. And I don't think the picture does it justice, because if you go there and you actually see these in person, they are just so deathly hot, and they just radiate like a field of death. And you can see the insects. There was a picture on another person's presentation. There are just dead insects everywhere because they go towards the flame, and then it's way too hot, and then they just burn to a crisp. And this tour, it highlighted a lot of the issues. And it just sort of, to start off the trip, it sort of felt like, you know, this was just how it is. It almost felt like there was no getting away from this, but I don't think that's the case. Let's go to the next slide. Next, we went to the Amazon, and this is sort of the main leg of the trip. We learned about how the communities there live sustainably, and sort of live with nature rather than against it, which I think is a sort of a big problem with how, especially like here in more developed countries, we sort of think of ourselves as sort of separate from nature. This is more philosophical, but if we want to live sustainably, we have to realize that we are animals. We live in nature. If we try to live separately from it, then it's not going to work out very well. And the death of nature will lead to problems for people. And another thing that we measured was E. coli and other toxins in the water. Apologies if you can hear anything out there. They're kind of doing work, but yeah, we did E. coli testing in the water, and in, I want to say, almost every single sample we took, there was E. coli, with the notable exception that we took a sample from a lagoon that was disconnected from the main river, Tiputini River, and there was no E. coli in there, which I thought was quite interesting. But you know, it makes sense; it's not really connected. But I thought it would like slip through, I don't know, the mud or something, but it didn't. So that was an interesting finding. Next slide. And then, sort of on our way back from the Amazon, we learned about sustainable agriculture. We went to this coffee production plant, and we had some of the coffee there, and they gave us a little tour of like how they produce the coffee there. And it was sort of a big shift from what I expected it to be. I expected it to be some sort of, you know, like depressing plant where they like stuff people in there and just like try to maximize the amount of profit and production for this crop. But it really wasn't like that. It was sort of like more open, and they showed us the specific like machines and processes that they use for that stuff. And yeah, the way they do it is like as far as I remember, they try to be pretty respectful towards their workers and not abuse them. Another thing we did, this was back in the Amazon, we made chocolate. Like we made it ourselves. And it just gave insight into how that process works. And I thought that was really just sort of, even if it wasn't what we really came there for, it was really valuable insight, just like learning about how these things are made and where they come from. We also saw these cocoa like plantations. We passed by one of those on the way to the Amazon. So we really got to see sort of where everything comes from and how you make it and just where it ends up. Yeah, and then we went to the cloud forest after the Amazon, and we learned a lot about ecotourism, the costs and benefits and trade-offs and that sort of thing. And there are some benefits to tourism. Everyone thinks it's just bad, but it does obviously bring a lot of income into the local economy, but it may have some issues with the quality of life for the locals. I think ecotourism is a lot better in this regard because obviously people who are coming over, they want to be, um, conscientious of what they're doing, but it's you just have to manage it in a way that the benefits exceed the costs, and sort of you spread awareness about the issues that are happening there and that could possibly be happening abroad. I think that's a really good way to sort of educate people on issues of sustainability sort of globally, is you start with an issue that's happening there and then you educate the people about problems that might be happening in their community and somehow relate that to their issues. Yeah, so next slide. And yeah, sort of that's basically what I learned. So yeah, sustainability, I believe it can be done. It may seem difficult at times, and it might seem hopeless, like we're just in this endless spiral of despair. But there are just some difficult choices that we can make that I think will end up with a better future for it. And we all have an impact across the globe, no matter how small it might seem. You buy you buy a bag of chips, it came from another part of the world. It has an impact everywhere, and I think everyone should be mindful of what they spend their money on, and just like um, try not to be too wasteful. And again, we live with nature, we don't live separately from it. So I think a lot of people, like a lot of especially Western countries, yeah, they just have this idea that we don't really live with nature, and I think that's led to a lot of like destructive practices and mindsets that we have to get over. And yeah, we're all in this together. We gotta work through this. uh yeah, and then some global connections to the Caribbean. I've been to the Caribbean before. I went to the Dominican Republic in 2021, again with the same group that I went to Ecuador previously with. And that was for a similar. We did like turtle conservation and coral reefs, and that was really cool. But yeah, that it's a similar, not too similar of an ecosystem, but very water dependent, very humid, sort of close-ish to the equator. But and again, I would say heavily exploited um just by tourism. There's a lot of bad tourism there. That Yeah, I've seen some bad stuff there, but there's a lot of problems that we need to work on there. And sorry, I'm kind of rambling now. Yeah, outreach and sort of getting, yeah, okay. Sorry. uh yeah, outreach and awareness and just getting these ideas to people, and connecting it to local problems so that they can work on it or spread the awareness back home is key. And then my favorite memory was zip lining. That was really cool. You were there, Dr. Veal, and yeah, that's enough of me rambling for now.
Thank you so much, James. Sorry for skipping ahead on your slides. Thank you again to everybody, all the students, all of our community group that was able to join today. Apologies for going over time, but thank you for those that were able to stick around. I put my email in the chat, so if you have any specific questions for an individual student or more broadly, feel free to reach out. I can make a connection to the students and to Dr. Veal as well. And like I said, we will have this recording link available, and we will post it on our YouTube channel once it is uploaded. So thank you again, everyone. Happy Friday. I hope everyone has a great weekend. And it was great to be here and great to hear everyone's perspectives today. So any last words, Dr. Veal?
I would just like to say that the students did a great job, and it's interesting to note how all of them had different perspectives and learned different things with the exact same trip.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kemet, any last community group things to go over?
Nothing community group, just another big thank you to both of you, to Veal and you, Alyssa, for introducing this idea to us and you know, blessing us today with some really good presentations from your students. Thank you again to you and the students for today's talks.
And thank you for the opportunity. I definitely learned a lot from the students as well as from our tour guides and Dr. Veal, obviously. So it was a great opportunity. All right, with that, thanks everyone and have a great rest of your day.